I'm delighted to have a great panel of experts here to have us have this discussion about how data can really power this entire concept of the autonomous enterprise or generative enterprise. I don't know. All right, so if you guys will join me on stage, let's start with Kevin Campbell, CEO at Syniti, and his purple vest today. All right. Aishwarya Gupta, General Manager and Practice Head for AI Strategy and Solutions at Wipro. We've got Lillo, Executive in Residence at Texas Christian University and Board Member at RiverLogic. We are in our monochrome coordinated vests also. We've got Amresh Mathur, who's held multiple e-com CX roles in firms including Samsung and Citizens Bank. Please join us on stage. And last but not least, we've got Abhishek Mittal, VP Data Analytics and Opex at Wolters Kluwer. All right, thank you for joining us. So, to refresh your memories a little bit, I know it's been a heavy morning already, a lot of discussion. Phil walked us through this sort of core principles of the autonomous enterprise. It's pretty fundamental that data is very much at the core of this. I might be biased, I cover this space. But we're seeing large enterprises seeking to radically rethink how business gets done, how their systems interact with employees, partners, and customers. And the way in which data moves in your organization really enables or inhibits all of that, right? Phil also showed you this slide today about what's holding back companies from achieving their big strategic objectives. He talked through a number of issues, but I just want to point out here 3 out of those top 5 challenges are data challenges, right? It's about data quality not really being as high as we need it to be, data governance, poor automation of processes and data. So we know, and we've known for a while now, that we need to fix our data. And that's what can possibly help us design our future with autonomous or generative enterprises. But how do we get there? So let's quiz our panel. If time allows, I am going to ask for some Q&A maybe midway through the session. Let's not leave it to the end. So start thinking. So we'll start with, let's see, bets. Let's talk about what makes data good.
We think about data as if it exists for its own reason, but what really makes data good is its ability to be used in decision making. And one of the things we heard from the last panel is that what we've got with autonomous capabilities is the ability to reuse information that already exists. And what really enables that is an understanding of data. So I would argue the data itself, without that understanding, is useless.
And I think that I completely agree with Bets in terms of additionally, if you look at what makes data good, it's completeness, it's orderliness, out of the silos, and consistency with the help of governed data quality, because data quality today is the most challenging task for the organizations to overcome. And if you look at the data quality comes with its ability to move around from the silos, what the consistency of flowing in from one section to the other without any issues. And that's where even if the data is being shared and it is not in the order, it may not give you the relevant outcomes. So definitely these 5 areas come together to make the data good.
All right. The autonomous enterprise principles start with leadership really needs to understand what is the data they actually need to win in their markets and their business. Amresh, what have you found in really knowing what is the good data that I need? Yeah.
Yeah. So from my perspective, I think good data basically is something that can be accurate, because then you are basically able to take a decision for the organization. And then most importantly is, can it reliable? Because like they said, the quality and all that is a challenge. So to take a informed decision, it needs to be reliable. And in these days, more and more, you see that it needs to be relevant, because fortunately or unfortunately, the data has moved faster than the humans have. So we need to kind of make sure that it's relevant, because of the explosion in data. And last, I think, is from a timeliness perspective. You're able to take a decision from a timeliness perspective, real-time information, so that you're able to imbibe all this data and do what's good for the organization. That's the way I see it.
It's a good
And
data
Ritika, I would
flows
like to
fast.
add
Yeah.
in terms of while we are looking at what makes the data good, there is a lot of hype around synthetic data generation. And we are looking at accommodating the data where we do not have with synthetic data. It has to be carefully driven in terms of setting up some of the benchmarking around how much synthetic data is going to be generated, where we are able to differentiate between the real data and the synthetic data. It should not be filling in all the gaps where it absolutely becomes very difficult to differentiate between the two, and the quality of the data will be jeopardized because we are generating what we want. It's not going to give us the right kind of analysis from the real data.
Yep. Yep. So you need to keep confirmation bias very much in.
Yeah, and actually, one of the things that struck me in one of Phil's earliest slides, he highlighted that the two biggest enterprise concerns are cybersecurity and supply chain disruption. And those are enterprise concerns because they're unpredictable and they rely on real events. So when we think about the data that we already understand how to manage in our organization, that's predictable and it's historical and it's real. So I think this ability to understand what it is we're looking for without augmenting the data in a way that takes us past that understanding is huge.
I just add, we did a survey with HFS earlier this year that's been out there, and it says 95%. It was C-suite executives, enterprise companies. 95% of them basically said our companies would be more competitive, right? Better customer service, better decision making, and more flexible. 95% said our companies would be all that if they had 2 times data quality. Right, and I said, we joked when we came up here, we were going to say that other panel that we just heard that talked about great things. If the data's no good, none of that works. Right, so this is the fundamental piece. It's the building block for what it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Abhishek, let me kick you off on this one. Does the org structure as it exists today in many large organizations, does it get in the way of us making good use of data?
Means org structures are never perfect, right? If you are centralized, then you're away from the customer. Your focus may be too much on the capabilities. If you're decentralized, you're close to the customer, but you are subscale. And if you have a hybrid, then a lot of time is being spent in just figuring out the allocation math and alignment, right? So org structures, as I said, are never perfect. The way I see it is like running labs, right? So you focus on the use cases, you focus on the customer, but every time you solve a use case, if you can invest in building a foundational data capability, I think that will serve you better, because that is the balance, right? I see if you're focused only on capabilities, then it's sometimes you're doing tech-driven, implementing in MDM solutions that are taking 5 years and there's no value and the organizations run out of patience. Or if you're focused on just solving one problem after the other, you're not really having the biggest impact of data and you're not really investing in foundational data capabilities. So focus on the reuse of the capabilities that you're building. I think that's the way to solve it. Org structures are never perfect.
Bets, I think you had a view on.
Yeah, I do have a view on that because I think when we think historically about how technology has grown up, It's grown up as a vehicle for helping us do functional activities better. And I think Tony on the prior panel got it absolutely right. It's figuring out how to optimize something we know how to do. But one of the real challenges is how to work across those functions, because those are the areas where we need to make business decisions that we don't yet understand. So this is really the conundrum around data, right? If I'm dealing with functional data, I know how to make it look good because I've got an organization that confirms that the data looks good. If I'm taking data across functions, and we see this with River Logic, where we started with supply chain network optimization, and now one of the things that we're doing is dealing with matching financial and operational data for ESG. We're now mapping data quality across different functions. So figuring out what good looks like is really challenging, and I think the organization absolutely gets in its own way of making good decisions. So I think figuring out how to navigate those functional boundaries will be huge.
Kevin, how do you advise clients on this?
So the org structure makes a big difference. And when we talk about governance, which is where we get into the data, I always tell C-level executives, and if I am talking to the CEO, in the focus, I say, are you ready to have the organizational discussion? And they're like, what does governance have to do with organization? I said, just wait, right? Because as soon as you try to change how the data flow works, as soon as you try to say who owns what, every organizational discussion you've had for the last 15 years will come out. And you want to see a food fight in the cafeteria of the executive team, right? Just start with that. Because it's valuable, right? So I think most companies have realized we don't give it to IT and ask IT to manage data, or we don't put a CDO in place who's an ex-IT person who focuses on outside data, not just what we need to do. What we need to do is figure out, right, what's the track of data in the organization, and then what's the most efficient way to do it. And that's why when we always say, make sure you're mature, make sure you're ready to have those conversations, right? To be able to do that, start, as Phil said, with what's the data that's most important, and then let's just walk through, because most CEOs she'll say to me, how hard can this be, right? And I'm like, okay, let's just start with the most important data and walk around who touches it, right? In order to be able to do that, and who owns creation, maintenance, and all the other stuff of that data. So it's fundamental blocking and tackling, but it'll tell you a lot. And we get what we measure.
Yep, absolutely. I think this org structure topic is very, very central to the design of an autonomous enterprise. I think we're going to get into that topic a little bit later, but it's also important to tie it to data ownership and access, right? All right, next, is upskilling actually working? What else can we be doing to help people work with data more intuitively and better, right? We had a little bit of a conversation on prompt engineering. Is that really the future? Maybe, Abhishek, you want to kick us off on that?
Yeah, this is a very passionate topic for me. The reason is I have a team of domain experts and data scientists. So domain experts are people who are lawyers, they could be compliance professionals, they could be our blue-collar fulfillment workers working in our fulfillment centers. And then I have these data scientists who are talking about machine learning, AI. So I think what works is three things for me from my experiences. Number one is the centralized training programs, learning programs. We have them, right? Each company has them. I think that creates awareness. And for the motivated few, they actually are a great opportunity because they take those opportunities and learn and upskill themselves. But a vast silent majority, they don't sort of they are busy in their day-to-day. It's unlikely that they will take time out from their day life to say, okay, I need to learn whatever, Python or Power BI, whatever it is. I think the way we have solved that problem is two-front. One is learning on the job. As part of transformation of our use cases, every time we have got an opportunity to look at a process, we've tried to make sure that domain experts lead the charge. I have a very sort of good story here. One of our expert service solutions where lawyers provide value to the other providers. It started as an expert service. It turned into a data service. And believe me or not, like 80% of the new data service is managed by these lawyers. First, because they became the users of the AI, they understood how to make value out of it. So when we started selling that AI model as a service, it's those experts who are actually helping other experts in our other clients' companies, and they are leading the charge. So that, I think, is a learning on the job kind of thing. And then lastly, I feel we as leaders also have to rethink our job structures, right? There's a lot of low code, and or whether it's generative technologies are coming in, but how do we create jobs where these low code no code workbenches can be really used to create value? I think that's the third thing that has really made sure that there's upskilling by really creating jobs which may not be a data scientist, but can be somebody can start with maybe maintenance of the work, giving them a framework which they can use to codify their expertise. So those are the three things that has worked for us.
Yeah, that's great. Aishwarya?
Yeah, so I think Phil talked about the empowerment of the employees as one of the major areas where leaders have to pay attention to. When you're looking at upskilling of the data competencies, yes, to a certain extent, that we are able to provide the curriculum and understand that what kind of skills are changing and they have to adapt. But it becomes very, very important to attach a purpose to it, that why we are asking them to upskill. And majorly, empowerment is one of the areas which will help employees to look at, I am empowered to do this job which will help my end client and bring the business value. Now, I have to look out that what skills are needed to deliver this job. Automatically, it's a driving function which encourages employees to go and upskill them, because now you have empowered them to deliver and be responsible for the outcome and the rewards you get in turn of that business value which we're adding to the organization. I think that's what if we are bringing intuitively across the organization and putting up that vision, it will automatically start pushing in and fueling in the channel for the upskilling, and you will no longer continue to push the people without telling them that why they need to upskill. And that's where I see a paradigm shift coming in at the job levels, where low code, no code kind of jobs, which Abhishek just talked about, that certain times they are not able to attach to this. And they say that, why am I wanted to upskill to this, because ultimately I'm able to deliver my job whatever you're asking me. So I think that could be the separate thing which we can intuitively we can work. At the same time, if we are enabling people intuitively to work with the data, it's very important to tell them that data driven culture change, which is bringing in the insights as past 50 years and the revolutions which you're seeing, automatically drives you that upskilling is one engine which has to be continuously fueled in. And that is why they are required to intuitively work with the data, which will make them more smarter, more productive, and faster turnaround time to the delivery, rather than doing the work the brute force way. So the moment they understand and they learn how to play with the data, it automatically gives them the empowerment which we talked about, that yes, I'm seeing the insights coming from this data, and this has to be fed into the channel of the talent optimization. At the same time, I mean, looking at the previous question which is connected here, that if you're putting in the right data functions in the organization, they are responsible not only to drive how the data flows. It is very important to look at the upskilling part in the competency, because they all go hand in hand. You can't be only looking at the technology side of the data governance and the data accumulation. And I think what CP talked about in the previous session, it's the animal kingdom. You gotta be continuously looking at how the forest is running the infrastructure around it's only the lion who gets the data, or we also need to empower the monkeys and the deers to collect the data, get the insight, and learn how to make the forest to live a better place.
Can I actually ask a question? Just what do you all think? I think that maybe upskilling is the same as new tools in a different costume. And if we think instead, how do we build and create the ability to understand? In our last panel, the topic of an ecosystem versus an enterprise came up. And I think fundamentally, what that is understanding context in the same way that Kevin was talking about all of the leadership capabilities are irrelevant if you don't have the quality data underneath that gives you the ability to accurately understand the world as it is. So I'd almost argue that skills and tools are the same thing, one applied to people, one applied to technology, and they're both useless without understanding.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would just add really quick that we own some of this problem as leaders and as an industry, because it's no different. The analogy I like to use is, when I get my kids' sports teams out there, what's the first thing that the kids want to do, right? They want to practice. If it's American football, they want to practice the flea flicker. If it's, soccer that we're playing, they want to practice ripping the jersey off and, being the one who scores. Well, that's the end of the process, not the beginning.
Yes.
And we don't focus enough on the fundamentals. What is data? What do I use it for? Right? Even look at the college curriculums. They're all going to, now every college is going to have a chat GPT, how to use it course. But does people have what's the basics of data and how we do it? And are we teaching our people the basics and the fundamentals and the fact that if, you get bad data, right? Good decisions with bad data are still bad decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it feels like we need to do both, right? Is continue to empower employees as best we can and upskill on just general data proficiencies, but at the same time develop systems and workflows that bring them the data that they need,
Right.
so they don't have to be data scientists.
Yeah, and I would like to add the last point, or ultimately you are making people more cognitive because they have the data at their disposal to take the better decisions. So the moment they understand that they're becoming more smarter, more cognitive, if you're using the data more intuitively, I think that's where everybody wants to become smarter.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a couple more questions, but before that, anything from the audience? Just put your hand up, and we've got mics going around. Yep, there.
So I was just thinking about listening to the discussion, obviously, around data. And I was thinking back to my days as an auditor. And nowadays, they're hiring CS kids to do the work of auditors. And the challenge that I see, now that I'm far removed, is that if you don't understand the data and what it's supposed to be and what right is, it's really difficult to let the tools do that, because if you don't understand it from the foundational pieces, bringing in that person at the higher level doesn't really do anything, because they don't know what's wrong. They just see the data and say, okay, here's the data. And I see that sort of as a problem I'm seeing today, is that people are bringing data forward and doing analysis on it, but the fundamental data is wrong.
Right.
So that's just one observation I've had. And the panel, I think, is really bringing that to the forefront. Thank you.
That's absolutely true. And I will just say, as an educator as well as a board director, my colleagues and I take very different points of view on the use of ChatGPT and generative AI in the classroom. I'm perfectly fine if my students want to do their homework using ChatGPT, because I have them write their exams with pencil and paper. So if it helps them learn the information to stand on a scaffolding of technology, great. If it doesn't, no harm, no foul. But when it comes down to them sitting down and talking about how they analyze a case, then they'll be doing it with what's up here.
And at the same time, if you look at ChatGPT responses, I've carefully analyzed, because I have a teenage daughter who uses ChatGPT for her assignments. you'll get the answers of these static questions and the history and part of it. Ultimately, you have to put your cognitive ability to analyze and take the right decision. So the application, the sympathy, the empathy part which you bring in your answers, and ultimately what decision you should be taking in that situation cannot be answered by ChatGPT. So definitely it's a combination you can use for getting more knowledge and information, but the cognitive decisions and the final outcome of presenting and applying the application in circumstances, I think that is a personal learning with which humans have to do.
Yeah.
I
So
think
we're actually already on this topic of culture, right? Because this is all about cultural
Yeah.
change. Amresh, any perspectives on what's been working for you?
Yeah. I think from a data-driven culture, I think like Phil set the stage earlier in the day when he had all the leaders and CEOs at this. I think the culture starts right from them, right? They're the ones who kind of drill down how the culture across the organization has to be. And I think what we heard today, the data-driven culture, I think every one of them resonated with the fact that in the organization they are actively thinking about making it data-driven. So I think it starts from the top. That's the first thing. And I think the second thing that's happening is, I mean, organization, the matrix that you just talked about, vertical and horizontals in the organization, everybody had an intersection point that, because they were so siloed, everybody had their own way of looking at data. So I think what is happening now is organizations are evolving, and we heard that from the leaders that they are trying to get in all these data owners. The owners kind of work with every business unit to kind of identify how this information that is there with them is going to be a valid use case, right? So that is helping drive a very, very data-driven culture. And I think the other thing that we heard from today's morning as well was from a data-driven culture, what we saw is, like Abhishek was saying, he has a set of data scientists and he also has a set of lawyers, right?
Yeah.
Now, what is happening in this data-driven cultures in the organizations is business is coming close to technology and technology is also coming closer to business. So no longer are the data scientists kind of sitting in silos and just making their based theorems and statistical models. They're actually interacting very closely with business to see how to evolve and make their programs, statistical models, whether it's prediction, personalization, or anything it is, more relevant to the business so that they understand that, together they will build what is the future of the organization. So that's another thing that's happening from a data driven culture in the organization. And lastly, what at least I'm seeing from an organization perspective is, as these silos are working towards having a common product owner or a data owner and working on these business and technologies, what they're also doing is trying to co-create a roadmap, like they talked about a 50, and I think Steve Jobs talked about that 15-year roadmap. I think what's happening is they're able to quantify the use cases that's going to make the uncertainty, even the uncertainty. I mean, while the data is used to say what's happening, the CEO is deciding what, but there's also an uncertainty associated with every decision. Now, in the culture, they also understand that we are not 100% accurate. So what they're using is they're also using the same data to make the culture and predict what's the uncertainty as well. So as together they are not only making useful use cases, they're also saying what we cannot handle with the data, how do we predict the uncertainty in those worlds, and that's how I think the whole organization is becoming data driven culture.
Just
I'm guessing actually when you were doing your auditing that one of the things you did way beyond looking at the data that you were seeing in the accounting systems and the business systems is you looked at the artifacts of the organization. You saw, were people parking in their assigned parking spots? Were they cutting in line in the cafeteria? And I think to really get at a data-driven culture, we have to take that very same approach, right? We have to look well beyond what's the specifics of the particular very narrow attributes of the individual components of data, and we have to look at the ecosystem that surrounds it, and is it helping the data to get better, or is it helping the data to stay the same or get worse?
one thing that I want to add to what Amresh said is sometimes the CEO really matters, right? And the top matters, but also I think we need to go back and show the values of what that culture has created. So we are good at sort of creating these programs, but I think any data program, there's always this question, okay, so what did this analytical team really create value? And how did it really help operations? I think at the big we know, but I think it's important to sort of also look at what decisions were made and what impact those drove and showcase that, because then generally it will say it creates that awareness that okay, I need to do this in my area as well, because in like I see that in our company are pockets which we are advanced and then they're not, and I think one of the things we are trying to do is concerted awareness on where it's working, talk more about it, showcase it, so that creates the culture sort of automatically.
Yeah, so a lot of sharing and
Yeah.
replication where you can.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think while we are talking about driving the data more and more, we have to be very cognizant about the responsibly sharing the data, because there's a lot of GDPR and those kind of regulations are going to be in place. And certain times while you're driving that data-driven culture, you have to put those checkpoints in place to ensure that it's driving and flowing responsibly.
Yeah. Kevin, you had
I was just going to say, weaving together what we've heard here, the previous question and the question we got from the audience, context is so important. So I do think we're missing something if we say we're trying, and I know all of us have tried this, have a data organization, right? Remember, the fundamental thing is we got to elevate everybody's knowledge of data, right? And when we look at Syniti, how we try to grow people, right? We take people equally from a data or more technical background and from a functional background, because in the end, they need both. And that was your point that I took from yours about context, right? If all we do is create great data people, how are they going to ever have the fundamentals, and how are they going to ever have the context? Because what makes fantastic data people is people that actually understand the context of what the data is being used in, so that they can make the right judgments. And then ultimately, we always got to remember, right? My hashtag is always business benefits, right? We're doing this all for a reason, right? I had an old boss who used to say, every time a new technology came up, she'd always say, Kevin, as soon as it can pick up my friggin' laundry, then let me know, right? And it was a skeptical way to look at new technology to say, is there a practical application for it?
We'll probably get there too, though.
Yeah, I'm hoping.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I think I saw a hand up earlier. No. Okay, we'll keep it moving. Actually, I think we only have a few minutes left. So, final question. Let's start from Kevin and work our way all the way down. Can we ever be done?
The answer is no, right? Like I said with my kids, right? The first question when you get in the car before you even go the first mile is, "Are we there yet?" Right? So that's always there, and it's hard to answer the question, "Can we ever be done with no?" But the answer is no, right? Because we've got to keep improving. But that doesn't mean we can't celebrate the journey along the way, and we can't celebrate milestones that we have and things that we do. But I think with all the progress we've made, if we have an objective look, some of the stuff that we did in the study with HFS said, again, we're miles away from where we think we are, right? So 95%, 90% of the people say the CEO sets the objectives, but only 60% of the people trust the data that we produce. After all this time, only 60% of the people trust the data that we're producing. Right, so it says we got a long way to go, but again, celebrate our successes and the progress.
No, I agree completely in the standpoint that data is purpose-built, right? You're using data to make business decisions. The business decisions you need to make tomorrow will be different than those that you make today, and they'll be standing on the shoulders of new data and new understanding and context of that data. So hopefully we will continue to evolve.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't be agreeing more to what Bets and Kevin said. Additionally, if you're looking at, it's a continuous journey and a 360-degree feedback loop, because while you are working with the data, you're driving that data-driven culture in your organization. It has to be an agile, continuous feedback loop of, am I taking right decisions with the data, and is this data still relevant for my continuous decision process? And that's where we need to be continuously working it, and it's going to be a continuous journey there. And having said that, how many times we realize that though data is data is the new oil of the industry, still at certain positions, leaders take their decisions based on the intuitions. Certain times the data is saying something, but they bring in their experience, their cognitive understanding while taking the big bets. And that's where I think we have to continuously improvise that data and look at the day where we are able to bring in that intuition related capabilities into the data, and it is able to drive that kind of decisions in terms of taking those big bets and predicting 100% accuracy along with empathy and that human element while taking the decisions. Because while we are talking about the digital employees and we are talking about fully data driven decisions, I think there is still one thread which is something which talks about that, okay, I understand that the data is showing me this kind of trend, but based on my experience as a leader, as a function, I should be tweaking my decision. And that's what I think all of us do at certain point in time. That's where I think it will continue to go.
Got it. Amresh?
I think I agree with all my peers that we'll probably never be done, and I hope so, because as much as we talk about artificial intelligence and data and technology, human intelligence will always triumph over artificial intelligence. So with that, while we try to find solutions for all the problems we encounter through technology, through collaboration, through tools and all that, every problem that we try to solve also creates a byproduct, which is a new set of problems. So, so there is a solution for a problem. There's a problem for every solution that you deploy. So it's a never-ending loop or iterative. You keep learning, iterating on it, and then keep evolving. Whether you apply it in the context of banking, or whether you apply it in the context of health, or you implement it in terms of what you can make a difference from a human value as such. So I think it's something that we keep evolving, and then every generation will have its own set of challenges. And the beauty is we all will work together to find new solutions. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll take the contrarian view. I think we can be done.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
the way I see it is as a lap or the S curves, right? So Saurabh and I were discussing this earlier. I think if we break the problems into small, like laps or S curves, whatever you want to call it, and I think that's a critical skill for our data programs, that defining milestones and considering that, okay, in this lap we have completed it, and celebrating that, because otherwise the organizations is like, when will I have perfect data? Never, from that perspective. But can we start using data to make decisions and showcasing them, as I said earlier? I think that's one thing to celebrate. And then I think reuse. I think we jump from, as data people, we sometimes jump from one tool to the other, and it infuriates the business people that, okay, it was this, then it's cloud, now it's ChatGPT, it was other. So like defining yes, we want to move to the next generation, but also celebrating what we have achieved is important. And I think that's why I want to say, yes, we can be done, but we also deliberately say, okay, now we're moving to the next lap or the next S curve. I think that clarity is needed, because otherwise it seems like we are sort of hoodwinking them a
No,
little bit.
we will talk about that.
Yeah.
This is the end of the era, and then we start the new era. So that's how the eras will go on.
All right, we'll
The
keep
version
adding
4,
S
5,
curves
6, 7.
with you. Yeah, ChatGPT 10.5, we'll be back.
And so
Don't
on.
worry.
Yeah.
And so on. All right, well, give it up for my panel, everybody. I like
Thank
this
you
quote from
so much.
earlier of hype is about hope at the end of the day. I think with this data conversation, there's certainly a lot of hope for how we are actually making progress, even if it's just 60% today on data quality, but we'll get there. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.